Okay, so without further ado, today's speaker is going to be Sarah Burr from Anatomy Gifts Registry. Sarah is a senior donor and family services coordinator in her third year with Anatomy Gifts Registry. In addition to coordinating donation and providing donor family services, Sarah's taken the lead on outreach and education efforts, like presenting to us today. She also manages personal items that arrive from donors and assists with the return of cremated remains to donor families. This fall, she plans to sit for the American Association of Tissue Banks exam and become a certified tissue banking specialist. In her personal life, Sarah is a mom to elementary age kids, adores her dog, and loves to go camping. Sarah will be sharing information today about what anatomical donation is and why one might choose to be a donor, and how anatomical donation differs from organ tissue donation, and how to become a donor.
Yeah, thank you
Welcome.
so much for having me. I appreciate that. So we'll get started with just kind of talking about what anatomical or whole body donation is. Of course, I represent a particular agency that does whole body donation. There are certainly other options out there, so we'll touch on that a little bit also. And we'll go ahead and get started. So again, I'm with Anatomy Gifts Registry. And Anatomy Gifts Registry is a whole body donation program, otherwise known as anatomical donation. We are a nonprofit donation organization. We support advancements in scientific research and medical education. And whole body donation offers a no-cost alternative to your traditional funeral or cremation arrangements. And here's a little bit of information about Anatomy Gifts Registry specifically. We've been around since 1994. Since 96, we've been recognized as a 501c3 nonprofit by the IRS. And we've got over 20,000 pre-registered donors. We are a crematory in the state of Maryland. We are a licensed non-transplant anatomic bank by the New York Department of Health, accredited by the American Association of Tissue Banks. And many of our management staff are AATB certified tissue banking specialists. That's the exam that was mentioned earlier, very rigorous test that a lot of the programs that do organ and tissue donation for life-saving transplant, they have to be certified specialists. We don't have to be, but we like to be. Just some good information there. All right, so what is whole body donation, or again, anatomical donation? So this is the donation of a whole body after death for the purposes of medical research and education. Again, that differs from organ donation because organ donation is not a method of disposition. It's simply donating organs for life-saving or life-enhancing purposes. Whole body donation is a way to leave a legacy helping humanity by advancing studies that aim to identify better ways to treat all kinds of diseases, better ways to perform all kinds of surgeries. And it's, as I mentioned before, a no-cost alternative to your traditional arrangements. So here we'll talk a little bit more about what whole body donation is versus organ or tissue donation. So a lot of you probably have that heart on your ID. That indicates that you've already consented to be an organ or tissue donor whenever your time comes. Of course, with organ and tissue donation, there are very specific criteria that have to be met in order for somebody to be a viable organ donor. When you have consented to organ or tissue donation with that heart on your ID, that does not mean you have consented to whole body donation. So they're completely separate. Organ and tissue donation is when your organs are recovered and then transplanted into another person. So, like a lung transplant, kidney, heart, for life-saving procedures. And then also things like cornea transplants or skin grafts. If someone has had severe burns, those would also be under that organ and tissue umbrella. So you're saving someone's life or improving significantly their life with that type of a donation. And whole body donation is when the deceased person's body is utilized for research, education, training for, medical students, surgeons to either keep abreast of, the surgical procedures that they're doing or to learn new techniques. And then, of course, for research into debilitating illnesses. So that is the difference between the two items. Additionally, whole body donation is a method of disposition. So organ donation, they recover the organs. Your family will still need to figure out, what do we do next? Are we doing a funeral home, burial, cremation? Whole body donation is that final disposition method as well. Okay. So here I like to highlight that with whole body donation, more good can be done. So this allows for additional humanitarian benefit after transplant or recovery. We fully support organ and tissue donation as well. So you can both donate your organs and be a whole body donor if you choose to do so, if that's what your wishes are. So you can help save someone's life in that way, and you can help advance medicine that can ultimately save someone's life by being a whole body donor. And when transplant is not an option, as does happen oftentimes, again, you have to be a particular candidate, meet a lot of criteria in order for them to determine that you're suitable to donate your organs. And if that's not an option, which happens for a number of reasons, this would provide another opportunity for someone who wished to be a donor to still be able to help. Folks who have received transplants are not allowed to also donate, be an organ donor. So a lot of folks in that category are interested in going this route. And then folks with riskier histories, like any drug abuse, for example, a lot of times they will not be eligible to be organ donors. So there's a lot of things that may defer a person for organ donation that would not for our program. So whole body donation, as you see here, has an exponential impact on research, education, and training. So all of our donors on average will participate in 4 to 5 studies. Of course, that can, fluctuate some, but each of those studies or training events, each medical student or surgeon that is learning from these generous gifts that these donors are providing is helping to potentially save innumerable lives. Think about when someone might have to get a cardiac bypass surgery. You're going to want that surgeon to have practiced a lot before actually having to do that work on a person to save their life. And without gifts like these, we would be relying on computer models or animal models, or way back in the day, they did, grave robbing, and we don't want that happening anymore either. All right. Here's some examples of various research endeavors that whole body donation can benefit. One is new organ and tissue recovery and transplantation techniques. So the folks that recover tissue and organs for life-saving transplant learn how to do that with anatomical donors. Surgical training and surgical advancement techniques. So again, maybe a knee replacement surgery, we're learning how to do those in less invasive ways with much more, fast healing time, less downtime for the patients. Medical device research and development, biomechanical studies. So that's basically studying how our bodies work, which then allows us to, develop better techniques in a lot of different areas. Hearing and vision impairment studies, neurodegenerative diseases, psychiatric disorders, cancer and the effects of metastasis and early detection and resection, life-saving procedures. So think of what your EMT will do, intubation, things that they have to do in the field, not in a medical environment, like rapid things that need to happen immediately, as they're transporting someone to the hospital. drug delivery improvements. So think of like the pumps that can be implanted to deliver medication, like pain medication, those sorts of things, and many more. So you may wonder why, after going through that, why someone may choose to be a whole body donor, or why their families may choose to donate. So there's three main motivators. Of course, there's other items, but I find that these three things are generally what drives someone's decision to be a donor. One of them that we come across a lot is the financial availability or the lack of a financial burden. So there is no cost for whole body donation, unlike traditional arrangements. So that's a big driver for a lot of families that do reach out to us. Of course, the educational advancements, especially folks who have family that are in the medical field or donors that were, nurses or doctors or scientists themselves, have a personal drive. Perhaps when they were in school, they utilized donor tissue to learn and they want to pass on that gift. And again, these things just really couldn't move forward in a meaningful way without donors like this. Again, we'd be relying on other models that, of course, computer models have come a really long way and are quite amazing, but there's just nothing that's going to compare to a hands-on training experience. And then humanitarianism for folks that just really believe in giving back, and want to leave a legacy, want to, do more after they've left this world. So those are the things that I find motivate most folks to want to become a donor or families to donate their loved ones. Okay, so distinguishing anatomy gifts registry, that's my program from other whole body donation programs. Again, there are plenty out there. So this is just some items that, are distinguishing. We are accredited by the American Association of Tissue Banks. As I mentioned, they are a program that accredits the organ donation folks. It's not a requirement that whole body donation has this accreditation. We did seek this voluntarily. There are only 7 whole body donation programs in the country that are accredited, and there's dozens of programs out there. We are also a nonprofit program. Of the 7 that are accredited, there are only 3, including us, that are nonprofit. That's something we are, very proud of. We do offer posthumous donation by next of kin. So you could register yourself in advance, when you're healthy and you're just planning for the future. But also, if someone passes away, they didn't have any arrangements made, and now it's up to their loved ones to figure out what's the next step. The legal next of kin is allowed to make a donation to our program as well. Donation after transplant recovery or autopsy. As I mentioned, we fully support organ and tissue donation, so that is not something that would disqualify someone from being a donor with our program. And an autopsy, if that was required, also wouldn't rule someone out for donation with our program. A lot of programs, those things would preclude donation. And timely return of cremated remains. We offer partial cremated remains that are processed within 4 to 6 weeks to be returned to the loved ones for timely closure. A lot of programs do take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to return cremated remains, which is fine with some families, and some families that doesn't work so well for. If death occurs out of state, we're in Maryland, we can accept donors from the majority of the United States, the contiguous United States. A lot of programs, you have to be in the state where they're located, so if you were traveling or on vacation or what have you, a lot of times that would make your donation no longer possible. We do have the possible ability to specify a specific avenue of research. So if you have a particular disease or syndrome that you would really like your donation to benefit, we do everything humanly possible to make that happen. We work with a ton of different researchers, so we reach out to them in advance when we know ahead of time to try to coordinate that. So whenever the time does come, we can honor that donor's or the family's wishes. And we're able to make that happen a lot, so we're very proud of that. We do have domestic and international tissue placement. Improving knowledge and outcomes is a global shared effort. So when we place donor tissue, we do work with both United States researchers and educators and others in other countries. And we offer donor follow-up letters. This is a really cool letter. It's optional to the families. Some families don't want to read about it. But if your family does, when you're a donor, we send them a letter a couple months after donation that lets them read about the specific avenues of research or education the donation has specifically impacted. So that's a really cool letter. A lot of families will share that during a memorial service or frame it, keep it with the cremated remains. All right. Pardon me. So AGR Donor Family Services, that's what I do. I'm a Donor and Family Services Coordinator. This is something that I think sets us apart a lot from other programs, and I can say that from experience. I've certainly spoken with a lot of other programs. We're really on top of our game with this aspect, and it's so important. I think it's the most important, part, the interaction with the families. We truly have a caring staff. We are available 24/7. Families can call us anytime, any questions, and we will do everything we can to help them and answer any questions they've got. All of our coordinators are very, very good at handling all kinds of scenarios, different situations. Of course, we run into some challenging family dynamics. From time to time, when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, things can get unexpectedly challenging for some families. So we're able to navigate those waters very well. We have a very rigorous training program for our donor and family services coordinators that lasts probably a good 6 months or so before they are allowed to get on the phones and start working with families. And we walk each family through the donation process from the very beginning until, we have brought the donor into our care and for months usually thereafter as well. And as I mentioned, we are always available for any help, any questions, anything we can do. As I mentioned previously, in addition to the special requests for donation specification, of research, we can honor special requests that families have, like cremating a personal item with the donor. Some families might want a thumbprint or a lock of hair, those sorts of things. If someone's local, they may like us to transfer the cremated remains to a decorative urn that they've purchased. So those are things that we can do for the families as well. And the little last bullet point there is about the directed donation that we mentioned before. I just wanted to touch on the cremated remains a little bit. As I mentioned before, we offer partial cremated remains to be returned. So what that means is when a donor arrives into our care, we recover tissue for placement with research and education. What we do not place, we will cremate and return to the family within 4 to 6 weeks. And again, that just allows us to both maximize the donation. Again, each of our donors benefits 4 to 5 areas of research, and then also to return cremated remains to families in a much more, expeditious time period, so that if they do want cremated remains present when they do a memorial service or something like that, that's something we can accommodate. Someone can donate and request ashes are returned or not, up to you or the family when they're making the donation. They don't have to have cremated remains returned if they don't want to. Some folks don't want to. Cremated remains, a lot of people ask, like, how do I know it's just me? Like, they are one person, like by law. So it is absolutely done individually. And there are a lot of steps and processes in place to assure that the cremated remains are that of a specified individual. And as I mentioned earlier, we are a permitted crematory in Maryland. So the cremation is performed at our facility. So we are in charge of the entire process. We don't outsource for any of those aspects. So the donor doesn't leave our care. We can guarantee that is the proper donor and said cremated remains. All right, so how to become a donor. with our program, and probably likely with the majority of programs, any that you may be interested in, the first step would be that a person contacts AGR or the desired donation program. And you'll speak with one of their coordinators. In our case, we will ask questions to determine donor eligibility. So we need to make sure that there isn't something that would rule a person out for being a donor. We don't want to waste anyone's time with completing paperwork if we know, there's an item present that would make them ineligible. And assuming they're eligible, we will complete the donor registration packet. That includes their medical history and the legal authorization. So if you're registering for the future, you're a healthy person, you're just trying to make some arrangements, we will send you the packet to complete. You return it to us. We send you an acceptance letter and 2 donor cards. So you can keep one in your wallet. For someone who is terminally ill or under hospice, so death is expected sooner rather than later, we will expedite that registration. Usually we'll try to get everything completed via email or fax or over the telephone, so that we can get them registered straight away. And then if it's for an at-need donation, so someone has already passed and we're then being contacted, obviously we have to expedite everything. Oftentimes we'll just do everything over the telephone at that time so that we can get moving forward. We're the ones who are responsible for arranging transportation, and we can't do that until we have all of the legal documentation on file. So it's something that we do, as I mentioned, over the phone. We've got to get it done right away. Okay, so I say take the next step and give with your whole being. All right, and I can open the floor to any questions or comments if anyone has any. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very informative. The reason I had asked Sarah to give the presentation is my family actually used your services earlier this year. My mother passed, and she didn't do a pre-registration, so I knew that she had said she had wanted to do so, and kind of got lucky with Google and found your organization. And as you said, the counselors were very helpful to all of us throughout the whole process, and it went very, very easily. So it's, another plug for the organization is the hospital also said that they'd worked with other organizations, and this was the easiest, time they had. I think the local Allentown service that you use, did a good job, and we got our letter, and everyone was very happy to know that my mother made a difference.
Yeah. No, thank you, and we really do take pride in that aspect, and we take it personally. We cry in the office all the time. We get really close with these families. Everyone's doing it for the right reason. We all feel like we're really making a difference in people's lives, and it's, even though it's tough, it's a tough thing to do. Sometimes it's, it means a lot, and so I appreciate that.
I also use services of Gift for Life, and it was easy, and it also, when I said goodbye to my husband in the ER when he was declared dead, that was my goodbye. I mean, I cried for 7 years after, but I didn't have to go through an open casket or a closed casket ceremony. We did have a memorial service 5 weeks later, and getting the box back was about 3-4 weeks after his body had been donated, was kind of difficult to sleep in the same room with the ashes. But we decided to, my husband and I had talked about this before we left Piscataway. We went up to State College, and we were only there 6 months. So having it all in my mind already what was going to be done was very helpful. So anybody, talk to your spouse, get it all out, and it makes it so much easier. And that letter we received, he wasn't able to really give any parts because he had had a melanoma. But my husband was Jewish and had a very big nose. And he was used on new equipment that they were trying out. And I got a lovely letter from the doctor. I mean, that's so nice that they take the time to do that.
Absolutely. A lot of families really appreciate that. We've gotten lots of callbacks from families just expressing their gratitude for that. And some people don't want to read it. That's why it's an option, but for folks like yourself, it's lovely to know like that, even in their passing, they've been able to, do something great and really helpful for a lot of people. Yeah.
Right.
Sarah, thanks for the presentation. Question, you mentioned AGR is accredited. Can you give us the summary of what accreditation means?
Sure. So again, we're accredited by the American Association of Tissue Banks. In order to be accredited, every 2 years they come and they have to audit our facility. A lot of what they do goes to the other side. I say the other side, like the other side of the building where I don't work. I'm in the office doing the donor and family services. So a lot of it has to do with the recovery processes, the storage facility for the donor tissues, like all of the procedures that go into place to actually recover donor tissue, to perform the cremation, all of the documentation that is required for the researchers and educators that we work with. So they're really going through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything we do is sound and by their standards. So they've got, like a 200-page book of standards that we have to comply with. So every 2 years they come, they make sure that we are going by their standards, no deviations. They do that with our side on donor services as well, but like we're always really good with that. They don't care as much about the, the registration process as they do about what happens once the donor's with us. Right. So once the donor's with us is basically when my job is done. They care about our record keeping. They have to make sure everything's behind, locked doors. And so they basically just make sure we're following all of their standards, as well as our own standard operating procedures. They need to review those and make sure that we are following all of those. So it's usually pretty thorough. Usually it's about a 2-day auditing process when they come through, and so far so good. It's a lot of work and of course a lot of money for the company to do that. And again, it's not required, but we like to be able to say that we are AATB accredited, and I think it offers a lot of public trust, as well as being a nonprofit.
And does some of that accrediting include approving the research and education programs that use the cadavers?
So I don't believe that, they don't approve them per se. However, there are criteria that those programs must meet. So we have to know the full scope of their project. Everything has to be vetted for scientific merit. And we have a full, documentation procedure that goes into place before we can accept working with a particular medical school, research institute, etc. So while they're not the ones who approve the clients that we work with, they certainly set the criteria that those clients must meet, and they do review those criteria. Like they'll sample, a few different donor cases to review, in the audit process to make sure that all of those procedures are being followed and that all clients are meritorious.
Gotcha. I was wondering, something like like the body worlds kind of thing, where cadavers are turned into display kind of things. I mean, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it, but at the same time, there might be individuals that might consider that not ethically what they want their body to have done to, or their relative. You know?
Yes. So something like that is not anything that we do. We do not provide any donor tissue for that purpose, nor for the like body farms. I think there's one at like the university in Tennessee, and there's another one where they place decedents out and observe the decomposition process, like forensic purposes. We don't do that. And we don't do anything like the body world. So it is all specifically for like medical education or scientific research. No general public display or anything like that.
Gotcha. And during an interview, you would review. So if you did have an exception with one of the programs, potentially you could have that, eliminated if you had an ethical issue with a particular line of research, perhaps.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And the authorization forms that either the family or the donor themselves have to sign does kind of go in. It's a long form, which I'm sure Bill can attest to, but it does go into detail about like what we're doing, so that there is informed consent. But yes, as far as I think you're asking if the client, the potential client, had anything in their scope of work that didn't seem to fall in line, is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of necessarily an example. I don't know, maybe some sort of gender study or something, or I don't know, something unusual, which I can imagine probably just doesn't get approved, but you might get something that is on the fence for somebody, maybe somebody more conservative, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah, I would say that we would always, if there's ever anything that's questionable, we would certainly err on the side of caution.
Gotcha.
Just because ethically that would be the right thing to do. And again, we are accredited, so like we can't really afford to walk that line, quite frankly. And if someone wants to donate to those other things like Body World, or you can contact those places. And that's what we would do if someone does ever request something sort of unusual. We would just advise that you contact that particular program or a particular school that does an area of research that they're interested in, so that they can hopefully have their wishes met.
I mean, maybe one example would be like medical school dissection. Maybe somebody just has an uncomfortable feeling, being involved in something straightforward like that isn't directly research, per se.
Sure. Yeah. I had a woman call me fairly recently who was saying like, I don't want to be autopsied. Like that's not something I want. I'm like, well, we don't do an autopsy. We don't do any kind of investigation. I'm like, however, your remains will not remain intact when a donor is being utilized for research or education. Like that's just a fact of the matter. Is there will be exploration taking place. Like that just is what it is. So if someone isn't comfortable with that, I would let them know that that's what's going to happen if you want to be a donor. And if that's not for you, then I would suggest not doing this. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. You had mentioned that there's times when the donation would not be suitable. What would be some of those instances that person couldn't be a donor?
Right. If someone is trying to register themselves for the future, there is a couple standard questions that we ask everybody. So one thing that would eliminate the possibility of being a donor is if anyone has a history of some bloodborne contagious pathogens, so like hepatitis B or C, HIV, and syphilis. Those items would rule someone out for donation. And that's pretty much across the board. And the reason being is when we receive a donor, we do a blood draw on every donor to test for those 4 items. And if any of them are reactive, the researchers and educators will not accept the donor tissue, simply for safety precaution. Even though they're using full PPE, it's a potential contact hazard, if there's a known bloodborne pathogen like that. So that's one item. For our program, we do only accept United States citizens, and that is because we know what all of the laws pertaining to whole body donation are in the United States. And there are some countries out there that it might be something that is not okay to do. So just to, again, cover ourselves and just err on the side of caution, that's what our protocol is. And then what else was there? Height and weight. So if someone's body mass index is very high, and that can be something that would rule them out for donation. That'd be very high. Like for Maryland, our upper weight limit is 350 pounds. And generally kind of close to the same for surrounding states. When we're transporting someone from farther away, like California, we have a little bit tighter restrictions as far as that goes. So those would be the primary items.
Why would you transfer somebody to California?
Why would we transfer someone from California?
I thought you said to California.
Oh, no. Like, we can accept donors from California.
Okay.
Yeah. We make all of the transportation arrangements. So we're able to work across the United States. And when we're transporting someone from farther away, like they have to be flown here. The costs are higher when we're transporting someone from so far away. So as far as the criteria go with like the height and the weight, we do have to be a little more reserved with that than we would with someone here locally that we can drive to us. Again, we're a nonprofit, so while we do take a lot of it is an expensive thing. If anyone's ever handled any kind of disposition arrangements, you know that it can be. And we take in all of those costs on behalf of the family. So we do have to, be cognizant of those items.
And do you pay for the transportation?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, whether it's California or, more regional, regardless, we cover those costs on behalf of the family.
Sarah, you mentioned cremation. Is there an option for green cremation, or is it all traditional cremation?
It is a traditional cremation. Sarah, how long after death do you need to receive the bodies? And I'm just wondering if family wanted to have a viewing, could you accommodate that? So I'll answer the first question, how long after death? So if someone contacts us and it's been 7 days since their loved one has passed away, like that's our cutoff. If someone contacts us within that window, we'll get stuff moving forward. If it's been longer than that, oftentimes we won't be able to proceed. As far as the viewing goes, if a family wants to do that, the first thing is, of course, that any cost that comes along with that, that's not a cost we would cover, if they wanted to do something like that. And we have had families have some kind of a viewing or service, but I would say it has to be something that's very brief. And it can't be like a traditional viewing, because in those circumstances, the deceased is left out for quite a period of time, and embalming or some kind of preservatives have to be utilized. And if one has been embalmed or preserved, we can no longer accept them as a donor. And furthermore, if they are outside of refrigeration for an extended period of time, the decomposition process begins. So oftentimes families will have a small personal viewing at a funeral home, where the deceased is maybe out for about 30 minutes, but it's not like a
big to do, like with invitees and that sort of thing.
I got a couple of questions before the meeting, so that these may not be perfectly relevant since they were before your presentation, but I'll throw them out there anyway. The question was, how can I donate my organs for transplantation while ruling out the possibility that my tissue would be used by a drug manufacturer or other for-profit company? So I think they misunderstood a little bit because it's not really donating your organs for transplantation, right? That's not part of your service. But I think the nonprofit, you can I think you said that in the presentation, but confirm that's.
So right, the first part, like you said, it's not going to be organ for transplantation. So any donors that we receive, we are not recovering tissue that's going to be transplanted into another person. So that's not happening. As far as the second part of the question, we are nonprofit, but we do work with some programs that are for profit. There are some medical universities that are for profit, that we provide donor tissue to. Of course, there are plenty that are nonprofit, but the fact of the matter is some of the researchers and educators we work with, like their particular organizations are for-profit organizations. So if someone was specifically wanting that to not be an option, I would have to suggest registering with a nonprofit university. Some universities have whole body donation programs where if you sign up with that school, you will go to that school and only that school and be utilized for the medical residents there. And then exactly what you're getting into, and there's no other programs involved whatsoever. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
I guess as a younger person, if you were to register and, not die for 30, 40 years, if there's any significant changes, do you notify the person of them? Or if for some reason you were to close up shop, is there a process for letting us know so that we can pursue other paths?
Yes. So we've had some scenarios where, Arkansas, for example, we had donors registered in Arkansas and Missouri. And around 2014 or so, those states had laws in place that didn't make whole body donation impossible, but made it impossible for us, basically. They required that if a deceased person was leaving the state, that they had to be embalmed, and we can't accept embalmed donors. So either you had to be able to drive, and those aren't close enough for us to, reasonably drive and keep the donor in appropriate condition. So in those scenarios, we pulled all of the donor charts. We have, paper charts where we keep everything, the signed paperwork, and then we also have an electronic database. So we filtered all of the folks that were in those states, and we basically sent out mass letters to them, notifying them that we unfortunately were no longer able to accept donations in those states. And then we also referred them to programs that would hopefully be able to help them.
And if for some reason you did die in one of those states or out of the country, would then it default to it being your responsibility still to dispose of the body?
Now, if someone is outside of our service area, then the family would have to make other arrangements.
I travel around the world with Rhodes Scholar, and this is the first time I ever thought about it. What if something happened and I became deceased out there? What would happen? Would another agency be able to do it there? Or
potentially, when this happens, when it's a state that we're unable to service, or a region in another state that we're unable to service, in those circumstances, we will provide the family with programs that we are aware of in those areas so that hopefully someone else can help them there. If it's outside of the country, that I'm not well versed on that particular aspect. So it may be possible, but I really am not quite sure, to be honest with you.
There may be some travel insurance that includes, return of a cadaver to, your nation. So I don't know if that would potentially, be a chance to work with AGR to still, pursue that. But I guess it would depend on length of holding over and things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects that we haven't done that. And I don't know that it would be impossible, but I think it would be improbable because on top of, like you mentioned, the time from when the person is passed until they're actually here, before we can proceed on our end with donation recovery, there are certain legal documents that have to be in place, like a death certificate has to be filed. There's something called, at least here, we have burial transit permits throughout the United States. That's something that allows a person to be transferred across state lines. A lot of states have to get cremation authorization from the medical examiner before one can be cremated. So there's a lot of things that have to happen before we can even proceed with donation. And if that's in another country, first of all, we're not familiar with what those procedures are, and they can take some time to have all of those items completed and documented. So it would seem to be a very challenging scenario to make donation happen here if someone were to pass outside of the country.
I think you touched on it a little bit, but so the kind of pre-registry that helps get some of the paperwork done ahead of time, and you get a card you can have in your wallet. But I think it's still up to the next of kin and the family, right, to actually contact you and make the process happen.
Yeah, of course. Like you can register with us, but if no one ever lets us know that you died, then, it's not like we would know any other way than your family or a police officer someone certainly has to call us. Yeah.
And as far as cremation, again, is cremation the only way of getting part of the cadaver back? There's no, like, if you wanted to skip the energy intensive, again, kind of carbon dioxide producing cremation process, but you still wanted to be interred, a little bit, would that be an option? Or again, I mentioned green or bio cremation before. Do you know of any way to do that, or is your organization considering that for the future, perhaps?
So presently, I do not know of any way of doing that. As far as returning remains, like basically intact remains, that's not something we're able to do. I don't know if that's something they would do, because again, like this would be after research purposes. So I don't know that we would want to return such remains to family, or, I don't know if that would be possible. And I don't know if green cremation is something that is being looked into or pursued by our management, but I can certainly inquire. Presently, it's not something that I've heard in discussions. That doesn't mean it's not something that they've wanted to pursue. I don't know if it's something that's like cost prohibitive at this point. I'm really not well versed on green cremation, honestly. So you'll have to educate me on what that is exactly. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, usually it's usually a bio process that again is much more energy efficient. It probably is more expensive, just like any newer, technology, as it's being developed. Eventually, I'm sure it'll be more cost competitive. And then, there are also green burial sites where, being able to be buried in cadaver or even partial cadaver, form, it could even be wrapped perhaps in some sort of sanitary, although I guess state approved container, like a cardboard or I forget the name of what they call it, but like a burial wrap of some sort. And then you're just not embalmed, because embalming also wouldn't be considered green, but then you'd be buried for just normal in the earth decomposition.
Yeah. And with you, I definitely like that idea. I've thought about that a lot myself too. Like, it'd just be nice to go back into the earth and like become the flowers, basically. So at this point, though, like with this program, those things aren't options. Maybe in the future, but right now they aren't.
Yeah, there are certified green cemeteries. So maybe something to pass up to whoever manages, the cremation option. Might be something that a local, I don't know if Maryland has green cemeteries, but there is a couple in Pennsylvania that I'm aware of that do, green burials, or you can have your cremated remains also buried in a green lot, which again is no real casket other than cardboard or some decomposable wrap. And again, it's not a deep burial. Or there might be some level that it has to be buried at, but it still is at a level that would allow for natural decomposition.
Did I read somewhere about California? Because some places they don't want you to throw the ashes in the ocean, but now I may have dreamed this, but that they now have where you can have your cremated ashes planted with a tree.
Yeah.
Anybody read anything about that? No.
You can. There's all kinds of things you can have done with your ashes these days. You can have them pressed into a vinyl record. You can have them like swirled around in some glass in a paperweight. And yes, you can have them as part of the root system in a tree that is then planted.
Right.
And I'm sure there's all kinds of other interesting things that you can do. Yeah, but that is correct. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'll actually paste in the chat. There's actually a book, and he's actually a local author. I maybe can track him down for a future speaking kind of thing, but it's called Grave Matters is the name of the book that goes, it's several years old now, so it might be in need of revision, but at the same time, he covers many different green options and considerations, for post-burial. And in fact, something like AGR services may not have been around at that time, because I don't remember him covering that, but it's exactly one of the items that he would certainly want a chapter on for considering your posthumous remains. So I guess the next step, I guess your website or email, or if somebody wanted to contact you for arranging that, would be how you get started, I guess.
Yeah, if anyone is ever interested or has any questions at all, people often have a lot of questions before they want to decide to ultimately go this route, but we're always available. We do have an 800 number where we can be reached. That's 1-800-300-5433. And I am always very accessible by email as well. That's another great way to reach me. I know it's kind of easier for some people these days to throw it out there if they don't have the time to sit on a phone call, but have a lot of questions also. And my email is my first initial and last name. That's S for Sarah. And then my last name, Burr, B like boy, URR, at anatomygifts with an S.org. And that's our website, anatomygifts.org.
Is there a certain period that we'd need to contact you if a friend or family member, passed and they didn't have pre-arrangements with you? Is it like within 24 or 48 hours, or does it, I guess, depend perhaps on the circumstances too, perhaps?
Generally, like right now, if someone calls us within 7 days, like we can, and again, assuming, they're in a hospital morgue or at a funeral home, like in refrigeration, they have to, they can't be at home for 7 days. which hopefully that wouldn't happen. But yeah, so about 7 days. And with Maryland or states right around us, we tend to have a bit more flexibility, but that's sort of our time right now. We were at 10 days previously, but right now we're at 7.
And if a person who passed hadn't pre-approved this, what typical consent would the family typically have? I don't know, jurisdiction or be able to make the decision, or would they need something in writing that the person would have had to sign beforehand?
So they do not need something in writing that someone signed beforehand, although sometimes someone may have a will or advance directive that says they want to donate their whole body, but that's not something that, has them having authorized with a particular program. Obviously, that's helpful because it directs the family and it just, shows that that's what the person themselves wanted, but it's not required. We have to follow something called the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, or UAGA. So that dictates how anatomical gifts can be made. And that also includes the hierarchy for who is allowed to authorize donation in the event that the person did not authorize themselves. So the first person that would, in Maryland, and it can differ state to state, the Universal Anatomical Gift Act, or Uniform, sorry. Some states, their next of kin hierarchy may be slightly different, but they generally follow the same hierarchy, which is a legal person authorized by way of will or executor forms that explicitly states so-and-so has the authority to donate my body, or so-and-so has the authority to make my disposition arrangements in the event of my death. And if no such person exists that's been designated legally, it would be spouse, adult children, parents, siblings, grandchildren, grandparents, and so on. Usually within those first, 4, we're able to identify, an authorizing person there, but there have been times where there's been an aunt or a niece or, someone else further on down the line because either the remaining family is deceased or, it's a single child and their parents had no siblings. Sometimes it can be tough. And there are circumstances when we're contacted by a friend or a girlfriend or something like that, and they want to donate, but legally they cannot, unfortunately. And even though they may be the person, sometimes the law stinks, right? Even though they may be the person that truly has the person's, best interest at heart, by law, we would have to defer to their sibling who maybe hasn't been in their life for a long time, to actually sign the paperwork legally.
So it sounds like really the best path would be to have a arrangement with you so that there's no family, upsetness perhaps, and then that the person whose eventual death results in the cadaver donation, they're 100% on board with the program and everything, it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I mean,
ideally.
A willed donation is certainly, the best case scenario when someone has made that decision. We always use these opportunities just to tell anyone who's listening, regardless of if donation is what you want to do, whatever you want to do, or, maybe you have elderly parents, everybody should have this conversation, even though some people don't want to, because your life will be so much easier, or your family's lives, whenever the time does come, if you know what the person's wishes were at the very least, if this is something they would want to do, or perhaps they've already made arrangements, if and when that's possible, it's certainly the best case scenario. Understandably, it's not always possible. Things happen unexpectedly. Sometimes people are just, far too young to have maybe thought of those things, and they, their time comes anyway. So sometimes it's not possible, but it's definitely a conversation we urge everybody to have with their loved ones. Again, because we deal with this on a daily basis, and we've certainly come across some quite challenging circumstances that had the conversation been had, the family wouldn't be going through the grief that they are to sort things out.
Will you accept the check on the driver's license if they say they want the donation?
So no, the driver's license check, or like the heart on there, that means that you have consented to be an organ donor.
Organ donor.
Right. So that means if you die and you're at the hospital and they're like, great, we could really use this person's heart, everything, like they meet all the criteria, that means they can go ahead and do that. Technically, they can do it without calling your family at all, although they do always call your family. I'd like to stress that. Right. They always call your family. And if your family was like, no, they would not want that, even though by law they could proceed, like they won't, because it's not the ethical thing to do. And why would you upset a family like that?
Right. Okay.
So being that you're in Maryland, if someone in Pennsylvania or say Florida were to arrange things with you, can that all be done by phone and online, or does there have to be a office visit at some point in Maryland?
Everything can be done by phone and digitally or electronically.
Okay, great.
It seems like we're winding down. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you so much, Sarah, for agreeing to meet with us. This is very informative. Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
it was. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.